Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Juan Verde to the show. Juan Verde is an internationally renowned strategist for both the public and private sectors, with a particular focus on sustainable economic development. His specialty is designing innovative strategies to attract investment, accelerate economic development, and support strategic alliances. Within the political arena, Mr. Verde was a Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Fellow during his early career and has worked to mobilize the Latino community in support of political candidates and issues. Most recently, he supported the 2020 Biden Harris campaign through his work with the campaign's National Finance Committee and Presidente Finance Council, as a founder of Americans Abroad for Biden, as a board member of the Latino Victory PAC, and as a member of 2 campaign policy committees. Mr. Verde's policy and private sector experiences have dovetailed in his efforts to promote sustainable global business practices and leadership development. He was a key advocate of Vice President Gore's The Climate Reality Project and helped create its Spain and Argentina branches. Most recently, he was selected as one of the world's 100 most influential Latinos in the fight against climate change in 2019 and 2020, and was featured at the UN Climate Conference COP25 in 2019. Juan, how are you doing today?
Good. Great to be here, Raj.
Juan, great to have you here. And could you please share with the audience where you're currently located?
I'm actually calling in from a town in the northwestern part of Spain called Orense in the region of Galicia. This is very close to the Portuguese border.
And how's the weather in there? How's the weather in Spain?
Spring is finally coming, my friend. So it feels great after a tough winter.
And how long have you been there?
I just arrived yesterday. I usually live in Washington, D.C., but my kids live here in Spain, so I try to come as much as I can.
Well, I appreciate you pushing through the jet lag for us.
A pleasure.
So, Juan, I'd like to open the show by asking my guest the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Well, um, I don't know whether there's something interesting about me, but I do believe I probably have a very unique life story. One which is, if I think about it, probably only likely to happen in the United States. I say that because I was born and grew up in the Canary Islands. This is an archipelago off the coast of West Africa, which actually belongs to Spain. I'm the first college graduate in my entire family. And, like the story of so many immigrants, I moved to the United States at a very early age when I was 15 years old by myself and actually without speaking a word of English. And only in America, I ended up graduating from some of the top universities in the country. I ended up working for 3 presidents of the United States, President Clinton, President Obama, and more recently, President Biden. God, it feels great to say that, President Biden, and many other global leaders from around the world. So I think, in essence, my story is the story of so many immigrants like myself who came to the United States and were welcomed and were helped by friends, mentors, role models. I've just been very lucky. So I think, again, my story is a story of gratitude, passion, and wanting to give back.
Have you watched the Broadway play Hamilton?
I have indeed, and I really enjoyed it.
You
It
know,
was
there's that one line: "Immigrants will get the job done."
well, I remember when I heard that quote. A friend of mine used to say that if you want something to be done, give it to the busiest person you know.
Hmm.
And to some extent, that's similar. Immigrants come to our country hungry for opportunities. So, yes.
Well, you're speaking to an immigrant too, and I've been very fortunate to have a great life here in Dallas, and I've been here about 30 years, and I feel the same as you do. And you mentioned gratitude and mentorship, and I'm so grateful to the mentors that I've had on my journey too. So I can really relate to what you're saying. But let's double click on that, that moment there you mentioned regarding coming to the country, going to college, and ending up working for three different presidents. Can you share a little bit about that journey?
Well, I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to get involved early on in politics at the local level in Boston, in the city of Boston. And when I was going to college, I was working for a campaign of a great man by the name of Ray Flynn, Mayor Flynn, back in the early 90s. And then one thing led to another. After President Clinton won back in 92, the mayor of Boston ended up going to the Vatican as the U.S. ambassador there. And he helped me find a job in Washington, D.C. That was the beginning of my political career, if you will. I ended up working for the chairman of the DNC of the Democratic Party, who a few months later became Secretary of Commerce, and then ended up working for him as a political appointee, young political appointee in the early 90s. And and after that, whenever the Republicans won, I would go to the private sector, and when the Democrats won, I would come back into government. So it's been a fun ride of public, private sectors coming in and out of it.
And if you were to give, one or two lessons perhaps that you've learned on your political career, what would they be?
Two things come to mind. One, I truly believe that most elected officials, most politicians are good people. I think their heart is in the right place. And I know that's probably not popular to say, and a lot of people think that if you're a politician, you must be corrupted or you must be someone who doesn't have um, good intentions. And I think that's sad because the most important thing you can do to change the world is either run for office or vote for someone who's brave enough to run for office. So to me, that's something that is not perhaps intuitive, but I truly believe that to be the case. Um, and the second lesson is that um, not everything is acceptable in politics. I think it's perfectly fine to say no, to walk away. And I've encountered a lot of people that didn't really understand that. They thought that power was something they needed to maintain as long as they could. So, while I do say that most politicians are great people, I also think that others are not, and power does corrupt.
It's interesting you mentioned that regarding politicians. I was having a conversation with someone very close to the family recently, and I was having the same conversation because they were talking about headlines regarding, some particular politician. And I said, look, that person really believes in their heart of hearts that they're doing the right thing for their constituents. And whether you like it or agree with it is a totally different point. And the fact that the media perhaps chooses to, headline sell, so demonize or perhaps portray that individual in a negative light. But, that person just believes that they're doing what's right for them, their constituents, and their country. So I would agree with you on that point.
Absolutely, Raj. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with their views, with their political ideology. But I do believe that even if you're a Democrat and the other person is a Republican, for the most part, they do believe they're doing the right thing. And you really have to love what you do in order to be able to work sometimes 18, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days. When you're an elected official, you have no personal life. And again, I don't think you would do that for the money you get paid. You do it because you think you're making a difference.
Totally agree. So, going back to the private sector for a moment, can you give the audience an overview of the Advanced Leadership Foundation and your role at the organization?
Yes, this I do a lot of different things, and I'm very involved in different activities. But the work I am absolutely in love with, the one I'm most passionate about, is actually the foundation work. 6 years ago, with the help of a number of friends, I helped create a non-for-profit foundation called the Advanced Leadership Foundation. We are now in 10 different countries around the world, despite only being 6 years old. And we have trained over 10,000 people in the last 5 years. We basically work with governments, institutions, non for profits, and private foundations around the world to identify and train the next generation of committed green leaders, men and women who want to work changing the world, and people who want to become agents of change in their own communities. They work hard to make the world a more sustainable and responsible place for everyone. And so what the foundation does is once we identify them is to train them and give them the proper tools for them to go back to their communities and become ambassadors or influential individuals in their own countries and communities and help us raise awareness about climate change and sustainability practices. But perhaps more importantly, we do it from a private sector um, angle. And by that I mean that we are out there promoting and talking to people as to why it makes sense for companies to be sustainable. Yes, it does make ethical and moral sense for companies to do the right thing, but we're absolutely convinced that acting green, doing the responsible, sustainable, um, right thing to do makes first and foremost economic sense, and that's our mission.
And what kind of training does it provide? Is there a framework or a curriculum?
Yes, so basically, great question because we are not an academic or a university type of organization. We look for people that have shown leadership potential and want to change the world. And then we bring them to the United States to gain valuable work experience for a period of time. So if we find, let me give you an example, and this is actually a true story. I was talking to a young girl from Mexico some time ago, and I'll never forget that day because she actually comes from one of the indigenous communities in a region called Chiapas. Chiapas is in the southern part of Mexico, and it's probably one of the poorest regions in Latin America. Now, she had graduated top of her class in economics from her local university, a place called Tuxtla Gutierrez, but she had never left her state in her entire life. We gave her a scholarship to come to Washington, D.C. and work at the World Bank and gain valuable work experience there. She ended up working in the microfinance department of the World Bank. When she finished her stay in DC, she was offered a job doing sustainable microfinancing in Chiapas to the indigenous communities back in her country. So those, and you see how we were able to sort of close that circle. We found someone with great potential. We gave them experience, tools, and then while they are in DC, they go through a very rigorous leadership training program, soft skills. We teach them how to become better at presenting information, at communicating complex thoughts and ideas, and of course to generate trust with the people they talk to. And then we send them back to their countries. So it's wonderful work, and I'm very excited about the progress we've had in the last 6 years.
That really is a beautiful story. Is there an application process?
We actually, yes and no, because what we do as a foundation is that I travel around the world and I meet with governors, mayors, or private foundations for them to provide scholarships for the young professionals that we end up bringing to the United States. So, yes, there is an application process, but it's usually only in those countries where we operate and only through their local governments.
That's a very interesting model. So the local government or the individual that you meet with has a process in their country, and then they identify a student or two to send to the program.
Correct. So that's basically how it works. We work very closely with, in the case of Mexico, as I mentioned before, and we're now trying to open up an operation also in India. So we work with the local authorities. They provide the funding, and we basically provide them with the turnkey service. together we find those people that we want to bring to the United States to gain experience here. And then once we find them, it's a turnkey. We pick them up at the airport. We find housing for them. We find a placement, and we take care of everything from A to Z until the day they go back. And we bring them with a J1 visa, which is a practical training visa. And we do this obviously because it does not allow them to stay in the United States after the training program. They have to go back to their countries. And that's one way also, obviously, to avoid the brain drainage that ends up happening in a lot of these places.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very, very interesting. So you mentioned the private sector, and I know you do a lot of advising and consulting work through Alamo Solutions. Can you share some information regarding Alamo?
Absolutely. I'm so fortunate. I always say that I get paid to do something I absolutely love. In the private sector, what we do as a company is that we partner with other private companies around the world, with institutions and governments, to help them make more money by becoming more sustainable. So I basically get paid to help them devise their own unique strategies and projects that can help them identify economic opportunities and allow them to do this magic thing that is do good by doing well, or do well by doing good. Depends how you see it. In other words, I think what I'm trying to say is that we are always helping companies invest in sustainability related projects, whether it's helping an old abandoned mine in Colombia. That's actually a project I'm working on right now, where they are reinventing themselves to actually use their old leftover, already processed residual minerals that they had worked with 20, 30 years ago before the mine was closed. And that was actually left over there before a Canadian company abandoned the mine. And we're helping the local community now to actually recycle the minerals. And in the next 6 months, they're going to be exporting rare earths and critical minerals to a number of countries around the world. So basically, they're getting paid to recycle the old minerals. So from that to helping an oil and gas company design an investment strategy that will allow them to transition into renewable energies and clean tech. Those are the types of projects that I work on.
So, if you can you walk me and the audience through perhaps a first meeting with one of these companies to where you're essentially trying to, persuade them to do the right thing?
Each case is absolutely different. Sometimes we get called in when the opportunity has been identified and they just need a strategy or a strategic partner to help them get the project off the ground, up and running. But for the most part, if I had to walk you through, I would say that the first thing we do is work with our partners there to diagnose the problem or the opportunity. And that's usually what we prefer to do. We try to work with people to understand that it makes, as I mentioned before, it makes perfect economic sense to actually work on sustainable issues or sustainability as a comparative advantage. Why? Because when you do that in a lot of these companies, what you do is you end up creating the right conditions for innovation and entrepreneurship to flourish. And when that happens, most companies become a lot more competitive, a lot more profitable, and they actually end up, again, doing good and doing well at the same time, because the strategy at that point is not just to make money, is to understand that, at least for us in our company, we always say that for a company to be sustainable, they need to understand that it's always better to make a lot of money for a very long time and not just make money for a very short period of time. That's what sustainability means. It's not just a vision from an environmental perspective. Being sustainable means doing the right thing for everyone for a very long time. So that, without telling you specifically how, walking you through, a lot of, most of the time we get called in to come in and work with either a local company that is trying to reinvent itself, or a company that is trying to diversify, or perhaps just for a company that wants to do the right thing but doesn't really understand how.
I love the idea of positioning a company with sustainability as a comparative advantage. I'm sure that gets their attention.
It does because at the end of the day, it's a lot easier for these companies to think positive and to be optimistic about the future if they have people working with them and for them that believe in what they're doing. And so, in a lot of these communities, in some of these emerging markets, emerging countries, what we do there is change people's lives, get them to be proud about the work they're doing, and to understand that they're not just coming to work every day to make money. They're coming to work every day, of course, to feed their families, but at the same time, understanding that they're making a difference, they're having an impact in the world.
Absolutely. Now, last year, for the second year in a row, you were named as one of the 100 Latinos most committed to climate action for the second consecutive year, like I said, which leads to my next question, which is the why behind what you do. You mentioned, your immigrant story, Canary Islands to America, and then working for the administrations. But this passion, this drive for sustainability that you said now, fortunately, and like me too, we get paid to do what we love to do. But what's your why? What drives you? What, pushed you in this direction?
Um, I think I think what drives me the most is that notion I just talked about, of doing well by doing good. It is such a simple but so powerful. It's an idea that again it's powerful and simple, but I truly believe that companies don't have to choose between saving the planet and making money. That is, at the end of the day, we try to get them to see that it's not one thing or the other, and that is so much better for everyone involved in that ecosystem, when they do both. When they make money, they remain competitive, but at the same time, they make a difference, become more sustainable, more responsible with the environment, because they have to go hand in hand. So I think what drives me, is that, understanding that saving the planet is not just the right thing to do, as I mentioned before, from an ethical and moral standpoint, but that is many times great, huge opportunity. And that's, to me, extremely, extremely important. And of course, I don't think I can answer the question of what drives me without, talking about my two young kids. They are by far the most important people in my life. They make me a better person, a better dad, a better citizen. They make me think about the legacy I hope to leave behind one day when I'm not here. And but they also remind me of why it's so important to fight for the planet now, before it's too late. That's the one thing that drives me every day to, try to go that extra mile.
Likewise, when it comes to children, I'm trying to do the same thing for my daughters. But you said saving the planet, and when you said it twice in a row, I heard an inflection and enthusiasm in your voice. So I'm going to assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you felt this way even prior to having children. Where does this desire to save the planet come from?
Yes. I mean, with a last name like Verde, which means green, I think I was, destined to, end up working in this area. I started working back in the early 2000s for Al Gore after he left government, and I helped him establish a number of chapters of his non-for-profit organization that is called the Climate Reality Project. And I think that's what really got me, to become passionate about this. But I remember a story about the work I did with Al Gore, and to me that was kind of an aha moment, a surprise. Um, it, as I mentioned, I was working with Al Gore, and we were traveling throughout Latin America, raising money to open up chapters of his climate reality project. And it was one day when I heard him speak to one of those sold out crowds. And he was talking, or you probably remember this documentary, it was called the inconvenient truth.
Hmm.
And I remember how upset people were after listening to Al Gore speak. But at the same time, I became so disappointed at the fact that they were not willing to change their behavior. They were not willing to vote differently or to do anything drastically different, despite the fact that they understood the problem. They understood how dire the situation was for the planet. And man, was I wrong? Because I thought, hey, if we just go to the CEOs, if we just talk to elected officials, if we just tell consumers how important it is that they get involved and they do more, they'll do it. But no, I was absolutely wrong. And I remember talking to Al Gore about this after his presentation. And he said to me something that I'll never forget. Um, he said, Juan, it's very hard for people to change their opinion about a particular situation if their economic well-being depends on that situation not changing. And to me, that was it. I went, aha. And from that day on, I changed my approach. I decided to start talking not about how bad the situation was, not about what we were doing to the planet and how bad we were. I started talking to CEOs and to companies about how much better it would be for companies and individuals to do things in a better way, about how much more money they could make, about how much better it would be for their communities, about how they could make a difference and be a lot more competitive. And I saw something click after that. So to me, that was it. That was that big moment for me. Obviously, I had been an environmentalist for most of my life, but it was my work with Al Gore that did it for me. After that, I decided that I wanted to spend the rest of my life working um, to change the world in a positive manner and to try to do as much as I could to leave a better planet for my kids.
So that story brings home why you approach companies with competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's where I saw it. I saw the opportunity, and then we started, showcasing examples of companies that were doing the right thing and were able to actually generate more jobs, be more competitive. They were investing in technology and innovation. They were creating wonderful places that people wanted to go to work and develop their careers in. And I saw it. I saw that made a difference. Where companies were actually able to yes to make money, but always thinking long term. And that was just a much better approach.
Absolutely. So earlier I mentioned the award, the 100 Latinos most committed to climate change. How have you seen climate change or sustainability talked about in the Latin community?
You know, good question. I'm afraid that it is not talked about in our community, in the Latinx community. The numbers are concerning to say the least. I recently read an article which said that only 5% of the staff or people that work for sustainability related organizations in the United States are Latinos. So only 5%. And yet we represent, depending on what state, but in California, we represent over 30%, 40% in some counties, so 30% of the population, and yet we only represent 5% of the people working in that sector. And when you actually look at the numbers, when it comes to boards of sustainability, green funds, green institutions, and non for profits, that number goes down to 1 to 2%. So that's part of the problem. We're not talking about it as much as we should, particularly because climate change affects in a very disproportionate way the members of our community. And those are the people that are actually on the front lines and are suffering from this existential global threat. So I hope I've answered your question. We're not talking as much as we should.
Well, let me follow up that question. Why do you think that is? I have my own perhaps hypothesis, but I'm curious to know what you think.
You know, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I do have a hypothesis, and that is that you tend to surround yourself with people you know, people you trust, people that perhaps come from your community. And when 1 or 2% of the board members of these organizations um, are with when only 1 or 2% of the board members are Latinos, it's not a surprise to me that we don't have enough representation. When you are the CEO of one of these organizations and you look around and the people you know and the people you work with and the people you interact with are all people that look like you, and that think like you and that come from the same universities and colleges that you come from, you are missing out. You're leaving a huge opportunity behind because, again, if the people that are being affected the most are precisely the people in the communities of color, then you should have more people from those communities working with you and allowing you to identify the problems and come up with solutions.
I agree with your hypothesis, and it might be off course here, but there's one other thing that I'd like to add too, and I'm telling you as an Indian, what I found is that society. So the Latinos that I've been around, they remind me of my Indian relatives. It's a very collective society.
Yes,
And the joke amongst Indians is that you're going to be a doctor, lawyer, or engineer because there's financial security and to some extent societal security in those perhaps three professions. But if a kid in the community says, I want to go off and perhaps save the planet, the concern is, look, we worked so hard to get you here to this country, perhaps, or your family is perhaps not financially well off. How are you going to feed yourself and your family if you go off saving the planet? So I personally, part of my hypothesis, there's some of that overhang or residue in that conversation too.
absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I also like that idea you shared about how similar to some extent the Indian and the Hispanic community are, uh, how how much importance they give to close relationships, to family, and to making sure that you do better than the previous generation and that you give your kids the best possible opportunities. So there's a lot to be said about that because you end up wanting your kids to become lawyers, to become bankers, to do anything that will obviously earn a high salary. But the world and the economy will be a low emissions economy in the future. This is an issue of speed, not direction. And I say that because I am absolutely convinced that when you think about the professions of the future, we should be talking about clean technology. We should be talking about renewable energies. We should be talking about clean tech. And we should be talking about where the jobs of the future will come from. I am absolutely convinced that this is going to be a very, very vibrant sector and part of our economy.
So if you had, let me say, two megaphones, one where you can talk to perhaps the more mature, older Latin community, and one where you could speak to college age, what are the two different perhaps statements you would give those different constituents?
Huh. Um, I would probably say the same thing to both, just in a different way. I would say to them that if you want to make a difference and you want to change the world, there are two things that you could and should be doing. I would tell them that those two things are buying right and voting right. I would tell them that they should be thinking about who they vote for carefully, and that they should also be thinking about who they buy from very cautiously. So I would tell them to again just think about the fact that they have the power. What do I mean by that? If you buy from companies and individuals that are willing to contribute in a positive manner to the world we live in, to saving the planet, that they are responsible with the environment, you're making a difference, a huge difference. And if you end up voting for those elected officials who understand signs and choose to make decisions, um, thinking about the next generations and not just about the next elections. That's how you change the world. So to the older crowd, I would tell them, be proud if your son or your daughter wants to join this revolution, because it is a revolution and we're trying to change the world, but also because the opportunities will be there. And if they're young, I would say the same thing. Make a difference, get involved. If you don't like what you see, change it. And if you don't like the elected officials you have, run for office yourself.
I love the idea of be proud. I think again, speaking about our communities being collective, I think pride plays a very very important role. And the thing you mentioned regarding the Indians and the Mexican and Hispanic communities, I read a great book called "Guns, Germs, and Steel" by a gentleman Jared Diamond many years ago, and he actually spoke about how the communities in South America were actually from the Indian subcontinent, and they walked across the Siberian land bridge through North America to South America.
Very, very interesting. And you also see that even in Spain, where people think that the gypsy community, flamenco and all these cultural traits of the Spanish culture come from Spain. But the truth of the matter is that they actually come from India. And I'm not sure whether you actually knew that, but there's a lot written about that.
Yes, I actually studied Middle East history in my college, and I know the Ottoman Empire spread through to the south of Spain.
Exactly, exactly. And so the gypsy communities in Spain that are so important because of the music and the art and the culture and even the language. And very few people know that we actually come from the northern part of India.
Yep, absolutely. So earlier you shared some lessons regarding politics, but you said you've been on this journey. I'm going to just ballpark it since 2004, so about 17 years. What are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned about yourself?
Hmm. That's a good question. A very good question. To be honest with you, I've never thought about that. Um, I've learned two things. I think I've learned that I have to be willing to allow others to join me in this journey, and to stop thinking that I alone can do this. I think that was a lesson I learned within 6 months in this learning journey. I used to think that, again, as the example I gave you before, I thought that if I traveled to foreign countries and I spoke to elected officials and CEOs there and I told them about the problem, that they would not only understand it but would actually help me do something about it. And I understood that that was not the right thing to do. It was not the right way to go about it. Um, I thought that one thing I learned about myself is that I'm a better leader when I empower others to see the problem, but more importantly, to be able to design the solution and then bring people in their own communities together. So to me, that was a huge lesson. I thought I knew it all. I thought I was smart enough to come up with solutions, and then I realized that not only did I not have the right solutions, it wasn't even up to me to design the solutions. 9 out of 10 times the solutions were there within the communities we were working with. So that would be one lesson. And secondly, I learned that better is good. What do I mean by that? Many times I thought that we had to get everything right, perfect, and get it done very, very quickly. And that was a recipe for disaster, um, because it's pretty much impossible. When working with communities, CEOs, and companies that want to make a difference, at the end of the day, to me, it's important that they understand that even if they are able to progress and improve their situation uh, 10, 20%, that's also good. It's not necessarily failure. Yes, we have to do a lot more. Yes, a lot remains to be done, but we have to start somewhere. So that was a humbling lesson for me, that you cannot get done. you cannot get everything done by tomorrow. You have to start somewhere, and that takes time.
It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which is slow progress is better than no progress.
That's a very eloquent way of summarizing and saying what I just trying to communicate in so many words. Thank you.
Of course, of course.
I love it. The power of
So
words.
I know, right? So, going back to Advanced Leadership Foundation for a moment, you mentioned several countries around the world. Let's say it's 2030. What's the vision for that organization?
Um, I'm so optimistic about the future, and I know that sounds to some people romantic or even stupid, but I say this with a big smile. And as I said before, I know it's not going to be easy. The road is going to be long and difficult. We're going to have to work very, very hard to win this fight against climate change. And I would even argue that even if we did everything right, as called for by the Paris Accord, we would still not make it, at least not on time, for the reversible consequences that climate change will most likely bring about. But there's so many reasons to be optimistic about. I look around and I see, for example, how President Biden was able to just a few days ago pass a $1.9 trillion stimulus package that calls for the greatest investment in research and development, innovation, clean technologies in an unprecedented way. We've never invested so much money in such a short amount of time in very specific strategic sectors of our economy, and that's what he's calling for in the next 4 years. When I look around and I see that the United States is finally leading the world, or beginning to lead the world in that area, it's something that makes me very optimistic. The fact that we are now in the United States wanting to become zero emissions and carbon neutral by 2050, and knowing as I know, because I'm very involved in this issue, that for that to happen, we'll have to be bold, we'll have to be brave, we're going to have to be willing to be creative and come up with ideas that are going to be, groundbreaking and game changing. That should be something to be proud of and be optimistic about. But even when I look at what's happening in the private sector, that's also, I think, a reason to be optimistic about what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. There are companies out there that are, talking about innovation and they're talking about incorporating technology to rise up to the opportunity and come up with solutions to fight climate change. And a lot of them are actually wanting to become zero emissions and carbon neutral by 2050. I look at what's happening in Europe right now. Yes, we are coming up with this huge investment plan to get ourselves back on track. But if you look at Europe, there are a lot of reasons there to be very optimistic about. In Europe, they are very involved in their own economic recovery plan, which is actually greener than ever before. What they're actually saying in Europe right now is, if we're gonna have to bail out the tourism industry, for example, and we're gonna give them public funds, let's make sure that the money does come with certain strings attached, so that when new hotels are being built with public funds, let's make sure that they are fully energy efficient. Let's make sure that they incorporate concept of the circular economy. If we're going to have to bail out the airline industry, for example, let's make sure that we give airlines um, a time frame to transition out of fossil fuels and into clean fuels over a period of time. So let's make sure that companies invest in clean technologies. And so, yes, I'm extremely, extremely excited about the future. I think this pandemic has given us an opportunity to hit the reset button in many aspects, be able to do things better. I love that quote from President Biden. It's rebuild better. But that's the opportunity. We have to be optimistic if we see companies that are looking at reinventing themselves, regardless of policy requirements or what the legislation or regulation says. A lot of these companies are moving up their timelines to meet their future sustainability goals. That's exciting. It comes to mind, obviously, BlackRock, the largest private equity fund in the world. I believe they manage over $7 trillion in assets around the world, and they have chosen to invest only in companies and projects that have a positive impact in society and the planet. Wow. And I say wow because a lot more private equity funds are following their footsteps. So this is a huge, vast opportunity for companies, for individuals, for entrepreneurs. This is an opportunity to be sustainable, to make money. And as I've mentioned a number of times in this interview, it's also an opportunity to do good, to do well, and to do it in a more just, equitable way.
Absolutely, and I can sense your optimism and enthusiasm. My middle daughter told me a word this morning. We do a word of the day little game, and the word of the day is Panglossian, which describes you perfectly. It's an optimist who stands slight naivete in the middle of chaos.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's
I
something I'm very proud of. I think you have to be.
100% agree. So, last question, and this could be professional or personal, and you've already given some advice, during the conversation. You mentioned, being proud, but I'm going to ask you specifically if you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience, what would it be?
I've worked with a number of wonderful, very prominent individuals, from President Obama to Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, or even Senator John Kerry, and I've always seen certain traits in all of them that that's probably that would be the advice I would give to people listening to us. To me, they are men and women that I greatly admire because they all share three things in common. They are people that feel passion for what they do. My mom used to say that if you are lucky enough to find a job you can be passionate about, you'll never have to work another day in your lifetime. And I completely agree with that. That is something that I always saw in each and every one of the people I just mentioned. They were so passionate about what they did. But they also, and that would be the second piece of advice, they all, we talked about pride, and that is very important. But they were also people that were willing to take risk and were not afraid of failure. And that to me is also something that I greatly admire in people that are trying to be successful in their endeavors and do well. And lastly, I would say that every single one of the people I've mentioned tonight are all people that always found a way, always went out of their ways, I should say, to give back to their communities, to give back to their country, to help others. They felt an obligation and a responsibility to do that because they believed that individual success does not exist. We make it when we make it, always on the shoulders of many others that paved the way for us. And so that would be it. Those would be the three ideas I would share with them.
I think it was Hillary Clinton that had the concept of it takes a village.
Absolutely. It takes a village, and particularly in the Latin community or the Indian community, where we understand how important it is to have mentors, to have people that will support you along the way. Because without that, at least in our culture, it's not worth it. If you only do it for yourself, then it's not worth the effort.
Well, Juan, I think that's a beautiful place to leave off. I really appreciate your time calling in from Spain, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.